everyone. Just a reminder that if you are live on social media, we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at KDocsFF, and you can share the dialogue using the hashtag KDocsFF. And now let's open it up for questions, comments from the audience. Please raise your hand, and a runner will bring a microphone to you. We will take questions in the order they are received. Please wait until the microphone reaches you so that everyone can hear your question. There we go. Okay. Right in the middle here, I've got a question.
Thank you. I'm curious, what is the current status of Monsanto's openness or willingness to change any labeling for, well, I guess the household uses will be gone, but what about any other sort of labeling?
Thank you. That's a good question because, when they claimed that they were going to replace the active ingredient, and one of the ingredients that was being bandied around was basically vinegar, why didn't they do that in the beginning? But the changing the label was a huge element of these trials and of all of the plaintiffs, just so that you know risk, right? And they have not changed the label yet, and they've been stalling on that. I mean, remember now Monsanto was bought by Bayer, so Bayer is now the company that controls it. So they're meant to be phasing it from the commercial market. It hasn't happened yet. Has anybody seen Roundup in the hardware store recently? Yeah, you can still get it, right?
Probably, I am.
No, I'm sure you probably stay far away from all of that. But anyway, they haven't done it yet. And one of the suppositions from the lawyers is that changing the label is an admission of guilt. So they don't want to do that.
Can I have one follow-up question? Are there any criminal charges? Is there any avenue for criminal trials for anyone associated with the malfeasance and lying associated at Monsanto outside of the world of tort?
Lauren Brown Warner is what are you second in command of Swim Drink Fish? Like what? Swim Drink Fish, Fraser River Keeper. She is a huge water advocate, and everybody here should support that organization. And one of the ways that Waterkeeper started by Bobby Kennedy, our friend, is that they were lawyers that prosecuted polluters, right? That was how it all began. So they used existing legislation in order to prosecute DuPont, to put effluent into the Hudson River, et cetera. And it was very effective because when they got the damages from that, they used it to clean up these waterways. But the problem with mass torts as a tool for justice is that it is money damages only, and it's one of those things that makes you think, okay, mass torts are great because it is the poor person's key to the courthouse. Nobody could ever, as the lawyers say, take on a corporation like this. However, they have a lot of money, so the money damages don't really change their behavior. And until there are criminal charges against the executives of these corporations, I don't think anything is going to change. Interestingly, there have been a few cases where, you may know about this, where for example, Royal Dutch Shell was taken to court by a lawyer for climate change based on a failure of duty, the government's failure of duty of care to their citizens, by giving Royal Dutch Shell a sort of special ticket, easy, whatever, even just not regulating them properly, and they won. So that is another thing that's going to start coming up more and more, that we have these lawsuits that exist in that way. Do you know about that a bit? It's pretty
Sure.
cool.
I don't know if you want me to take a minute to comment here, but the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, so I'm their current president, in September launched a complaint, so it wasn't a lawsuit, but a complaint to the Competition Bureau of Canada against the Canadian Gas Association, who have been advertising fracked methane gas, or natural gas as they call it, as clean and affordable. the average person knows there's no such thing as a clean fossil fuel. It's very polluting from the extraction process to when it's burned. And so we launched that complaint in September, and then in November, just 2 months later, they announced that they were opening an investigation, official investigation into the complaint based on what they saw as the validity of our complaint. And so this is the first time that the Gas Association in Canada has had an official investigation opened into them by the Competition Bureau. And I think part of this is the new focus on greenwashing that the Competition Bureau has been taking, perhaps as a result of their new leadership. So we'll see. And as you said, Jennifer, the amount that we're asking for is the maximum amount that can be paid to a certain environmental damages fund, and it's $10 million. This is nothing, to a consortium that's composed of major fossil fuel utilities and producers within Canada. But we're also asking that they not ever be allowed to advertise their products as clean and affordable again, and post disclaimers anywhere they may be advertising their product. So that may have the larger impact than the $10 million or whatever. But there is awareness around the importance of legal action and the power of legal action to hold industry to task, to account.
Carey, has that ever happened in the United States? Like, it seems to me the Wild West in the sense of that kind of thing, that nobody would give government that much power. Has that ever happened where...
I can't think of an incident other than, of course, the Monsanto scientist who went to prison for fraud, right? When he was working for IBT and was helping manipulate the scientific studies that the companies were giving to regulators. And that, of course, was outright fraud. And he was charged and convicted, went to prison. Monsanto paid his legal bills, and he was with Monsanto and then transferred over to this research company and then went to prison. And then I believe went back to Monsanto. But, the company is paid, they were charged with bribery for trying to bribe foreign officials over their GMO seeds, and they paid fines. The Attorney General in New York went after them and that sort of thing. But the only criminal where somebody goes to jail kind of thing, at least with respect to Monsanto, and I can't think of any with other companies as well, really. I mean, other than you get the embezzlement, that kind of thing, the Bernie Madoffs, but I do agree with you. I think that until and unless we are holding individuals accountable, it's not just a cost of doing business on the company's, budget, but it's actually CEOs or chief operating officers or chief technology officers who are having their own personal lives and their freedom at risk if they're committing these crimes. I don't think we're going to see a lot change anytime soon.
Can Hans introduce himself before we
Absolutely.
go to another question?
I'm Hans Forstbauer, just a farmer, and I've been farming for a long time, since 1970s. And in 1961, Rachel Carson wrote the book on Silent Spring and basically attacked DDT and so many of the other agricultural chemicals we have. Well, it turns out DDT basically sterilized the eagles, the whole food chain. And that's when I became a vegetarian, because I thought, I'll protect myself. So I've been a vegetarian ever since, long before all this stuff. These Johnny-come-latelys or whatever await me. And Jennifer, I'm
Everybody's allowed to be a vegetarian, even if they haven't been doing it for...
It's not even... Yeah, no, of course, of course. Everybody can be whatever they want to be. And I totally admire your intellectual honesty making that film, because you made a big risk. You took a big risk. You're part of the establishment. And we need to ban Roundup immediately. Glyphosate is out. We did it for COVID. And part of the whole COVID, why did we have COVID, is because we have all these chemicals and viruses are here to update us. Update us. I never wore a mask. I didn't change anything in my life for COVID because I knew nature would protect me. Nature is so powerful, and we're on the wrong path because of greedy people and money, and you can't eat money. Nature, if you don't poison it, it automatically makes you healthy. It automatically makes you healthy. Nature wants you to live. Nature wants you to live. And the sooner we as a society understand that, and your film helps in that direction, and all the knowledge is out there, and the super intellectual people that are doing the research, it all shows back to nature. Life gives us life, and we need the full spectrum of life to be healthy. The soil will give you health.
It's very true.
It's time we stood up and said, no more big money controlling us. Our health is more important than money.
Yeah.
You'll hear it everywhere. And I'll tell you a little story. 30 years ago, I planted blueberries, and 14 different varieties. And some of the varieties, they were totally, I didn't get any blueberries off it. They were totally mummy berries. But we just pruned and cut the grass and left the prunings in the field and proceeded on, because I'm kind of lazy and I want nature to show me the way. And it did. The last 5 years, never using any pesticides, natural or artificial, just compost. All my blueberries have blueberries, and we have no mummy berries, and we have no fly, the Sven fly.
Okay.
Nature really works.
Yep.
And
There,
get off your ass and tell the politicians to do something.
there's a very sound adage that if we take care of the land will take care of us. Are there more questions?
Wait a minute, I'm taking over. I also want Melissa to talk a little bit, and Carey, because they didn't really introduce themselves. So I'll just say, so Carey you saw her in our film, but she's also she probably knows more about glyphosate and Monsanto than anybody else in the world, I think. And she has been advocating. She has her what's it called, the New Lead? That's your.
It's my new news outlet, the new lead. Yes, it's an
New Lead.
initiative of the Environmental Working Group.
And Carey was attacked by Monsanto for when she wrote her books, and that whole sort of intimidation in that campaign. But can you talk a bit about how long you've been working on all of this, and then Melissa, because.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah. Yeah, a long time, since 1998, actually. Worked for Reuters. I've been a journalist for my entire career, and Reuters assigned me in 1998 to start covering this company called Monsanto that was revolutionizing agriculture with its genetically engineered crops. And so my job was to learn everything about the business and, of course, their glyphosate business and how that was impacting agriculture, food production, environmental health, what was the science behind it, what was the science as it related to weed resistance and impacts on pollinators and biodiversity and agricultural trade and the commodities markets. So I spent a lot of time, with farmers and grain handlers, and a lot of time in Monsanto headquarters and in their labs. And they opened the doors to me pretty much because they wanted me to learn the narrative from their perspective and then to share that with the world. And as I covered this area over many, many years, I started to really see the evidence that their version of the truth wasn't necessarily the same version that you were hearing from scientists and even farmers and agronomists and that sort of thing. So the more stories I wrote, and particularly about the science around glyphosate as it was developing, because this became the most widely used herbicide in the world, and so many people then were being exposed to it, and because it was having so many impacts in the environment, scientists began to really ramp up the research on the health effects. So there was more and more evidence that this could be harmful to human health, in large part because of its excessive use, right? And the fact that there are residues in so many of the foods that we consume, as well as in the water. And the more I wrote, the more Monsanto decided that I wasn't welcome in their headquarters, and the more I became targeted for a whole array of attacks, even before I started writing the books. I mean, they were coming after me, and we found ultimately documents and evidence about just a whole array of dirty tactics that they deployed to attack me, other journalists, scientists.
Yeah, like independent
Yeah, scientists, everybody. So, you know, it increased with the books, obviously, and carried on after Bear purchased them. But, you know, at least for this week, it's pretty good, pretty low key right now.
Now, Melissa works for CAPE, who is they're one of our partners in the campaign in Canada. And the work is really incredible. And I don't know if you know that there's a new study, that Ramazzini study, which some people are, I think it's worth doing. There's a 2-year study on glyphosate. The results are about to come out. So can you talk a bit about the carcinogenicity issues and human health and pesticides?
I want to be really honest, I don't have a ton of expertise on that. I have more expertise on fossil fuels and actually nature. So I mentioned I'm president of CAPE, but I'm also director of park prescriptions for the BC Parks Foundation.
Oh, wow.
But I just want to quickly give a shout out to my fellow CAPE colleagues. So CAPE actually started in the 1990s, and one of its first targets was the pesticide, herbicide industry. And so they campaigned for years to actually create bans. And so 2008 was the first time that they helped secure a ban in Ontario on cosmetic pesticides. They've helped secure bans in New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, Quebec, more recently in 2021. So there has been a lot of work done on that, but I can't say I'm an expert on this. I'm sure Carey probably knows a lot more actually about the health effects of glyphosate.
Well, the study that is being done right now, okay, can I just...
Can I just say something?
Yes.
We don't need any more studies. We need
Well,
to ban it
No,
right now. No.
I agree with you, clearly.
Okay,
I obviously...
don't-
No,
just
no.
let me talk
Okay,
then.
okay. Yeah. Good. Go ahead.
Wow.
No, go ahead. I agree with you.
That's what I don't understand. The courts aren't going to help us. Money, we can't buy the courts. They buy the court system. They do. And they brainwash us with their own money. It's unbelievable. And DDT, total example. We banned it in North America, but we still produce it for third world countries, and it's still being produced in America and still exported to other countries in the world for mosquito control. What on earth is going on? Come on, people. And we have the solutions. Elaine Ingham in the Soil Food Web will tell you exactly how to grow healthy food and for us to be healthy. The science is there. The science is there. It's no longer secret. But they're working it, and you get censored and censored and censored. And brainwashing our young kids. I have grandchildren that, even though I'm as crazy as I am, I guess, they still believe the other side.
Well,
That's how powerful it is.
I do think that science is important because
Yes,
right now
I have
this-
the examples. I watched nature. I planted a cedar tree. Listen, I planted a cedar tree and I took a shrub out of the woods and planted it beside it. And you know what the cedar did? It went like this. The trunk is here and the cedar went like this to avoid the shrub, which gave off signals so it wouldn't be shaded out. And that's how smart nature is. Nature's been working on how for life to survive for 3 billion years, and we think we can fix everything in 70 years. We're nuts. We're absolutely nuts. And don't tell the courts will fix it. The courts don't fix it. We need to fix it. When we shut down the world with COVID, it shows how powerful the media is. And that's all. If we can shut down the world with COVID, we can shut down the world using pesticides and farming for people's health and life on Earth.
Thank you,
And
Hans.
glyphosate, It not only affects, cancer, it's just the very tip of the iceberg. It's just the tip of the iceberg. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And that's what drives me crazy.
Thank you, Hans. I'd like to welcome questions from the audience again. Yes.
Hi, Jamie with Mining Watch Canada. And my question is really about how this creates change, because Monsanto gets bought out by Bayer, but it's the same hedge funds that own both of them. They just changed the nameplates. And of the hundreds of thousands of noxious chemicals that we've created and introduced into the environment, this is one of them.
I don't use any.
Undoubtedly a really big, important one. But how do we turn this kind of really significant moment into something more systemic, more structural, that actually goes to putting us back in a frame of mind of the precautionary principle of not just approving every chemical that's submitted based on fraudulent science or incomplete science on the assumption that somehow we're going to manage all this and the ignorance of the synergistic effects and all of that. How do we turn that into something that actually starts changing not just individual behavior, but our collective approach to how we work together?
So I'd like to start that, and then I want Carey to finish it, because there is a way that it can happen. Like the film, those bigger picture things that I talked about in the introduction include regulatory capture, the limitations of mass torts as a tool for justice. And regulatory capture is a very real situation, not just in the United States, but in Canada and all over the world. And because of that, because industry is left to somewhat, to regulate itself, it isn't the precautionary principle at all. It's just wait until somebody has a complaint and then actually does something that makes that corporation have to respond. And if it's harming people, you have to prove it. And it's really mind-boggling that is the way that we do things. But there are regulatory reviews going on right now in Canada, in the United States, and the EU. And we are trying to use the film as much as we can as an inflection point for those regulatory reviews. So we're doing a screening for EU Parliament in Brussels on the 12th of April. Carey's coming to that. And we're bringing Lee to that screening because it's really important that he's there. And if the EU bans glyphosate or restricts it, it has a huge impact on exporting agricultural countries. So even if the change is not the idealistic change that we would like, which is just a straight out ban right now, there is an attrition that can happen that way. And so, and there are a lot of people working towards exactly that kind of outcome. And we're just one other piece of that. But when I talked in the beginning about making an historical record, this will stand as a document of that time and that trial when, in this case, an ordinary person actually did win against the devil in corporate form. But can Carey just talk, and then can you speak to that, Carey?
You keep looking back.
Well, I'm looking at you like, hi.
That's where you are.
Yeah, I know, because you're really
Yeah,
tall.
you said the devil. That reminds me of very early on in my coverage. I was at a meeting with a group of wheat growers that Monsanto was sponsoring. It was like a Mexican tequila party. Monsanto was paying for the wheat growers. And I was talking to some of them, and they were telling me that they secretly called the company Monsatan. And that was the first time I'd heard that. But I think, to the point of the audience member, I can't remember your name, I'm sorry, but I agree wholeheartedly and try to make the point in my books and when I do public speaking that in my perspective, glyphosate, yes, while it's the most widely used herbicide in the world, historically so, currently so, found so pervasively in our environment that it's even been documented in rainfall. I do think it is but the poster child for a much bigger problem that we have with the whole array of pesticides and other toxins in our environment that are working cumulatively to make us sicker, and to impact everything from, fertility to neurological development in young children, and then of course cancers and Parkinson's disease in adults and older people. So it's a huge problem that involves corporate power, regulatory capture, manipulated science, a whole lot of different things. And I think the answer, what can we do, is also very multifaceted, and it's different for every individual. For Jennifer, she makes a really powerful film. For me, I just try to report facts as I find them and go out and report on science and research that maybe other people wouldn't be digging up and reporting on, trying to illuminate things, trying to speak out about things that I've seen and I know to be factually true that I think are helpful to people. But I see, there are people all over the country in the United States, where I'm from, who are going at a local level to maybe their school districts or their park boards, or they're going to a state level. They're asking for bans on aerial spraying. They're asking for bans in parks. Then there are people who are just saying, I'm going to vote with my pocketbook. I'm only going to buy organic. I'm not going to buy food sprayed with pesticides. And then there are people lobbying in Washington, D.C., right? So I think it's how much you have, what energizes you, what you care about, but whatever you feel that you can do, you should do, because this is incredibly important, because this affects our health, our current health, our environmental health, and the future, for our kids and our grandkids. So there's a lot to fight. It's a big fight, but you can't walk away from it, and you got to have the enthusiasm of our farmer here, right? I think, to just keep going.
Thank you.
Upstairs?
Questions upstairs?
I just want to add something to this discussion. Did you want to say something, Hans? You seem like you really want to.
Yeah, I was going to say something. Early on in late 1970s, I took a pesticide course, and the instructor was a person from the research station, which basically tested the pesticides for the government and said whether they were approved or not approved. And they told us glyphosate was so safe, Roundup basically was so safe you could drink it. And wear protection because that's what we do. But at the same time, he said, don't use it in the greenhouse. If you have a greenhouse, don't use it in the greenhouse. And people said, so why not? And he said, well, if you spray it in the greenhouse, you won't be able to grow a crop for 4 or 5 years. And at that point, I understood that glyphosate recycles in a closed system, and the earth is a closed system, and it recycles. And as you put more and more on, we get more and more damage from it. And glyphosate not only kills plants, it kills bacteria. And two of the bacteria that produce the amino acids that make us healthy and keep us healthy it kills it in our gut, and it makes leaky gut. It's a toxin that makes all the other toxins more powerful. So because we can't detoxify because of it, and it also gut-brain barrier, and that's why we have part of the reason we have so much autism, and why my brain doesn't work properly too. So as long as we keep putting it on, we put a bigger and bigger load on our whole system. True. We got to change. We got to stop now. The other chemicals, yeah, they're bad, but
I want to mention something based on what I just heard from Carey, actually, about the relationship between glyphosate and Parkinson's disease. So my father-in-law was actually diagnosed with Parkinson's disease about 5 years ago, and my husband mentioned to me, he remembered his dad in his backyard spraying Roundup on the lawn or whatever to keep it green, and he would wear no protective equipment, go out in his sandals, his feet would be soaked, they'd be numb. He said when he would come in, he'd say, oh, my feet are numb. because, it's safe to drink. Anyway, so I'm just thinking about the possible impacts on my own family members. But to your question, I forget your name, from Mining Watch, about how this catalyzes change. I think part of it, and why this film is so powerful, is because it shows us how systematically industry tried to fool us. And so there's research behind the fact that when the general public, the lay public who doesn't necessarily have expertise in a certain area, hears something, they hear from science-based experts who are speaking the objective truth, and then they hear from industry or the other side who has a vested interest, and they hear these two sides and they think, oh, okay, well, I don't know who's right, and they just ignore it and move on with their lives. But when we actually highlight the fact that industry is trying to fool us and bring forward the evidence of them trying to fool us, then the public says, okay, I get it. In fact, science is right, industry is wrong and trying to fool us. So I think it's really important to continue to tell these stories of industry fooling us, because that's what's going to start to move the public. And that applies to the fossil fuel industry, that applies to, the cigarette tobacco industry. There's so many examples of this with industry trying to fool us, but we have to continue to tell these stories, I think.
Yeah.
The
Jennifer, can I
Monsanto
just-
papers. Yeah, the corporate malfeasance is
Jennifer,
enraging. Yes.
if just one point on that, following up, yeah, the European Parliament, asked me to speak in Brussels to them in 2017 when they were last reviewing glyphosate, and I did that alongside several scientists. They had special hearings on this, and of course, I'm not a scientist at all, and so I couldn't weigh in on the science. But what I said to them in my presentation and showed them examples of emails and communications is that exactly what you just said, that there was such a depth of deception, and they went to such efforts to manipulate and hide and secretly pay academics to put their names on papers that they would ghostwrite. And my question has always been, if you have the science on your side legitimately, why would you need to ghostwrite papers? Why would you need to manipulate anything? Why would you need to pay people under the table and deceive consumers and lawmakers and others? Maybe there's another reason for that, but I certainly can't understand why you would need to do that if legitimately your product is so very safe.
Right.
Thank you. We have a question on the balcony.
I wanted to share that one of my sister, you're not here, sprayed with Roundup on an incredible mountain hillside. Iris, they had the most beautiful color, and that year everything turned white. There's no more color in the iris, and that was about 10 years ago. But what concerns me is that I have a cat, and I have been pretty much vegetarian. So it's in the food chain. How long do we have to crawl inside our gut thinking about this toxin that's inside us?
Wait, why did she spray the irises?
It's called goat's head.
Oh, that's really
Yeah.
okay. Well, I think Melissa can probably speak to that. I'll talk a little bit about one of the things that might be in question in Canada and in the EU, even if there isn't an outright ban, is the practice of using Roundup as a desiccant. And that means, for those of you who don't know, it dries out crops evenly by killing them right before harvest, so that when they're wet or, it's raining too much and they can't get the crop dry enough. And quite frankly, they use it. It helps farmers a lot for those purposes. But that was the first time. And when was that? Was it 2000? When did that happen? 2003 or 2006? When Roundup started to be used widely as a desiccant?
Well, it was legally, but I mean, farmers being farmers, they
did it before.
The word spreads really fast, and they do whatever they do, especially when it's not tested for.
So was it the early 2000s, Carey?
I'm trying to remember, I've got a big glossy brochure that Monsanto sent out to Canadian farmers, but that was a little bit more
Later.
mid-2000s, but they were certainly aiming for that and pushing that idea in the early to mid-2000s, and then accelerated that particularly for crops like wheat, where they couldn't get the industry to go on board with a genetically engineered version.
And pulses and I mean soy, et cetera. Like
Well,
these
it's huge on oats, in Canada. I think maybe you've already
exactly.
made that point. But
So-
Canada just 2 years ago approved it to use it on pulse crops like lentils and beans, and it's-
some of our crops have been
nuts.
rejected because the residue levels are too high in those crops when they're being exported. But the point is that this was something that the lawyers wanted to bring up in court and they couldn't because they didn't have enough hard evidence, so it didn't pass. But that the spike in Crohn's, irritable bowel, celiac, as you say, leaky gut, all of these things happened. There was a correlation between when it was sprayed directly on food and those human health issues. And the study that has been done right now in Bologna, they're looking at 3 elements: carcinogenicity, of course, and it's a 2-year study because it takes the lifespan of a rat in 2 years is similar to the lifespan of a human. So they're looking for hard tumors, not just non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or blood-related cancers. But what they're finding is there's endocrine disruption, there's carcinogenicity, there's total disruption of the gut microbiome or any microbiome you can imagine where it's sprayed. And the other thing is it's a fertility issue because it's a chemical, it's a testosterone mimicking chemical. And so there are also issues for infertility that I had not heard before that is part of their research. And that research will be coming out at around the same time that we are screening for EU Parliament and around the same time in that window where they're going to debate about whether to renew it or not. So there are places you can go to send your urine to see how much glyphosate is in your urine, or you can do blood tests. And then there are people who promise, rightly or wrongly, detox programs for that kind of thing. But that study, who did the study that said 80% of people have glyphosate in their urine? Was that in the United States?
The CDC,
The CDC. So
Centers for Disease and Control.
yeah, so we all have it.
Yeah, it's so pervasive. It's crazy. And
More questions?
There's a question there.
Hi. I was just wondering if there's any information about like where it's being sprayed here, whether it's in our schoolyards in Vancouver. I'm a pediatrician here, and I mean, I want to be able to warn children or know, what to tell people, because it does seem pretty serious.
the point is, it comes down in the rain when, and that's the biggest problem. It goes everywhere.
Must be an issue. So I'm just curious, do we know where it's being sprayed here?
Exactly, and everybody's epigenetics is different. Like, so what may affect one person won't affect another person because the epigenealogy of your biome, basically your genes.
Yeah, well, I mean, being local to Vancouver, maybe I can take a stab at this. Nice to see a fellow MD here. So a fellow MD of ours, so a fellow Cape member, actually said he was in Pacific Spirit Regional Park and he noticed a sign by the trail, caution spraying, looked closer at the sign and saw that it was glyphosate being sprayed in Pacific Spirit. So I was shocked to hear that because I go there with my family all the time. Beautiful second growth forest. And I'm not sure why they're spraying glyphosate in the forest. My son's 8 years old. I go to his school regularly for pickup. I haven't seen any pesticide, herbicide signs ever in his schoolyard, probably because parents would be outraged if they knew that were happening. So I have a feeling it's probably not happening in school grounds within Vancouver, but it is happening in our regional parks, apparently.
I'm not sure that that's true. I bet that there's a possibility that it is being sprayed in school grounds because it certainly is all across the States. And the only place in Canada, interestingly, that has banned it completely. There's supposed to be a ban on cosmetic use, but nobody enforces it. So it's not like the police are going to come up to the suburbs and, nail people who are spraying their lawns. But in Montreal, the island of Montreal has completely banned pesticides and glyphosate. You can't even buy them in the hardware store. And they just recently also banned them on golf courses, which of course is a huge user of glyphosate and Roundup. And they're kind of leading the way for us as a place in Canada that has done it and is absolutely surviving and thriving. So we can all move to Montreal, or we can fight for Vancouver to be the second city that pledges to completely ban it.
I know
Yeah, they wouldn't necessarily, at least here in the United States, they don't have to put up signage when they spray school grounds and that sorts of thing. They do in public parks, I think, and I'm not quite sure the reason, although it would make sense that on school grounds, you control the timing of the population, right? So they don't spray when the kids are out there playing. Lee would talk about that, about the timing of that, but it's definitely the default to spray glyphosate on school grounds unless people protest or the district is very aware and progressive or something. So probably in Canada, I would guess it's pretty common as well.
Just to beat a dead horse, I'm an organic biodynamic farmer, and people ask me, does your produce contain glyphosate? And I says, I don't know. You'd have to test it, because I can't guarantee that it's not going to be contaminated with a certain degree of glyphosate, because it comes down in the rain. And as an industry, organic farming, we just promote and tell people how to grow and do all these things, and yet we have this chemical that's being dumped on us. That's why I'm so passionate. It's time we spoke up. All we do is concentrate on growing organic food and telling the public how great it is for them. Yet we can't guarantee it goes to GMOs too. And glyphosate is married to GMOs, and that's why it's used so pervasively in sugar, in soybeans, corn. Like 90% of the crops are sprayed with glyphosate, and now the other even more toxic chemicals.
Thank you. Thank you once again, Jennifer, Melissa, Hans, and Carey. We're so grateful for the time you spent with us here tonight. Thank you for the questions from the audience.